The presence of gender constructs cannot be separated from the ideology of biological determinism. Why do you think biology or biologic is accepted as a rational basis and inherent organizing principle of the social world? I think it's because of white supremacy. That's why. That's what I think, but I'm just me. So please feel free. Because I just had, before this, I had a discussion with someone, my cousin, and she was like, yeah, like, there are men and women. And she was like, she really found it so hard to, like, to accept that this isn't like inherent, this isn't a thing that's fixed. Like, this is like biological determinism. Like, this is, we're in the book, she says gender essentialism, like reducing people to anatomic distinctions and then exaggerating those differences and then saying, these are the social categories that you fit into. But all because of like,
if we look closely at the rise of and study of biology, and the main folks that contributed into the building blocks of what biology as a study is, we see it's mostly white men, that came with calculations and measurements of Black people's bones and how they are inferior to white people, that kind of thing. Like, so we have to understand that what we call biology and even science, in some regard, apart from objective truths, still have the attachments of the order that they came out of. So if we're conscious of that, then we'll see that they are not free from how they are biased. Like, they're not free from the bias of the order of the day, There's a really interesting speech by Michael Parenti on gender equality and all. Very nuanced. I like the guy a lot. Like, we should listen to it about how the male folk is more, like these are the people you consider as the most forward-thinking minds of the deal. Like, maybe Nobel Prize winners, even Darwin and all these guys, like, that have this male-centered type of description, in the fields that we call biology. So in as much as this field has enlightened us, to how the world works, we should also recognize that they are not free from the order of the day that is, patriarchal, or that has men at the center of things. You understand what I'm saying? So that's why I feel that that biological aspect is emphasized from, when it comes to gender things, gender explanations, like, it's emphasized in discussions and has been used as a basis, when discussing or talking about, relations in our own human society. So yeah, it's not about being ramble.
that was good.
Hello? Can I come in? Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, in my own understanding, we also need to understand that who are those who are trying to identify the biological difference between gender or between human beings. These are white people. If you try to check based on like what you said, Bumi, like it's white supremacists. And the white supremacists who are biological terms to differentiate between who is superior between the white man and the black man. And if you try to use go on the context of African society, we need to also try to understand that in African society we do more. Women are the one who go to the farm, who do much of the work, majority of the house building, things like that. So if I try to contextualize on who do more or who have more physical strength, then it should be more of our women, because our women do more in African society. So on this context of biological determinism is on the European context, not an African context. But if you try to view it on the African context, it would be like we will give more validation to our women, because our women are doing much more in our own society. You know, if you could check what's it called, the family structure of Eastern Africans, you see like African women are the one who do majority of the housework, you know, do the house building, you know, do the cooking, you know, on etc. And that signifies a strength of, that's a biological strength of how African women can do more than the women in our own society. So on the structure of biological determinism, still based on the Western understanding of gender. So for me, I still feel like this question is to clarify the understanding of biological determinism in Western structure of gender. Thank you very much. Hello?
Yeah, we heard you. Yeah. Anyone else?
Well, I go with OAG. I think he said what I would have said. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that also, like in that article from Horton Spillers, she talks about it's so horrific. She talks about how it was, you know, it's the body of Africans that is used to, you know, really perfect biology, as like OG was saying, like it is it's not funny, it's really actually sad, but there's nothing else to do but laugh. It's on the body of Africans that these ideas are perfected, that, you know, people are selling Africans to test out craniology or test out, you know, certain theories about biology that they want to find out. People are sending their disowned African slaves to other slave owners or selling them to slave owners. People, the Africans who cannot be productive on the farm, they're sending to these so-called scientists to test out their biological theories. And that's like, she talks about that. She talks about, you know, she distinguishes between the body and the flesh, how, you know, the body might heal, but the flesh remembers the trauma that was inflicted on it, not only in the Middle Passage, you know, primarily in the Middle Passage, while, you know, the Africans are, you know, being held captive, and when they, you know, arrive at wherever it is that they arrive at. I think we do. And another thing, you know, she says an American grammar book, she's questioning the language that is being used, because she's an English scholar, and a lot of, I think, as a result of colonization, we place a lot of importance on, like, obviously anything Western, but we really just we exalt, and, you know, anything Western, we're like, oh yes, it's biology, it's empirical, you know, it's all science and math, it's numbers can't be wrong. But like, these people, like she says in the book, you know, even a researcher comes from their own society, and you don't leave your own biases, your own, you know, assumptions at the door when you go into these so-called scientific, you know, endeavors. But yeah. Anyone else on this slide before I move on?
I just want to ask to get more fleshed out this idea of white supremacy. Oh, sorry, I think I have an echo. Just give me a second. Yeah. Don't know why I'm getting an echo here. Sorry. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly.
So yeah, just to flesh out this idea of white supremacy. Why is it that white supremacy, in particular to gender? I know we have gone to race in some of references to that, but I'm not quite convinced that we have tackled it to the extent of gender.
Well, I think that, like, this is which is why she, like, forces us to really dig into where we get our knowledge from, or even the basis of our assumptions. And I think that in the preface, she talks about how, the purpose of white supremacy is to, I feel like one of the many purposes is to enforce a certain, to have a certain hegemony of ideas across the world that only serve white people, essentially, that only serve their own ends, that only serve their own purposes. And so the idea that gender exists only in binaries of male and female is a white supremacist idea, because other cultures didn't have only two genders. Other non-white cultures didn't have only two genders. And in this book, her argument, her investigation proves that Yoruba society didn't even have gender categories. So I feel like it only serves white supremacy or white supremacist ends to insist on gender categories even. And then to insist, not only do they insist on gender categories, they insist on gender binaries. And I understand capitalism to be racial capitalism, not just like capitalism, which is like the intervention Cedric Robinson makes in Black Marxism, that, people disagree and say, it's not racial capitalism, but I understand it to be racial capitalism. And so, and gender plays a very specific function in capitalism. Like, it is for a reason that, they want to have male and female in a household. They want to have people, one category who will do all of this unpaid labor, and the other one who will exert its influence on the other gender. Like, they want to have hierarchies. Like, I don't know, that's just how I feel about it, connecting it to why I said because of white supremacy. Like, I think that biological determinism is white supremacist rhetoric, because they don't only use it for gender, like they use it for race as well. Like, they reduce everything to, these, tiny distinctions, as she says, and exaggerate them to mean like, now this is a social category, and then have a category in opposition to the other gender. Like, now they create the man who is like above the woman, who has this hierarchy. It's not even a horizontal kind of thing. Like, it was horizontal and power was shared equally, then we'd be having a different discussion, I feel like. But because of it's, it's a horizontal power structure with the power at the top, and women, so-called women, begging for scraps and not even having any power. Anyway, that's a long-winded way of trying to answer your question, why I believe, biologic is rooted in, white supremacist ideas, because who are they to dictate how we translate the body? Who are they to say how we view the body? And she says in the book, in the preface, that physical bodies were not always social bodies, which, I don't know, made me to think about, okay, so what can social bodies be? And why can't we have physical bodies not be social bodies in this? Because the ideas that we have, they, like white supremacy or Western ideas, they have a hegemony of ideas. Like, they're the dominant, ideology, which, just to take it back to that article, like you were saying, the absent father, what they were trying to say, what the report guy was trying to say in the article was that African-American families should model, the dominant, family structure. That African-American families, why aren't the males the head of these families? And he doesn't go to the root of the problem, which is obviously capitalism and slavery and all these things. He just says that, because of African-American families have like a matriarchal structure, this is a handicap, like they're at a disadvantage. And she's saying, no, we're not at a disadvantage. This has always been the case. Like, they've never had quote unquote fathers, because African-Americans are property. If you're property, you can't have that family structure. I mean, you have your own family structure, but your family structures are not recognized, because at any moment your quote unquote daughter can be taken, your father can be taken, your mother can be taken. So people have to adjust. And so what comes out of that is matriarchal structure. So, but the researcher, Monument report, he's like, no, African American families should reflect the dominant family system, which is a white way of understanding what families should look like. Like it's it's a white supremacist understanding of what the family structure should look like. Why do we have to understand the body in this way? Why do families have to only look like male, female, and 2 or 3 children? I don't know. That's just how I.
Yeah,
Hello?
that's great.
Can I come in?
Hold on, please. I want to come back.
Hello?
Yeah, I hear you.
Can I come in?
Can you hold on, please? I want to come back. Yes, hold on, please. This is very interesting. I hope you heard me, Bayo. I don't think there's enough time because I think there's a lot of things to unpack here. But that was actually a great answer. But it takes me to, even with that explanation you just gave, like it's more of a materialist understanding of society, and in that case, because with the mention of racial capitalism, which is a concept I fully agree with, whereas I disagree with Cedric Robinson about the progression. There's a kind of thing about racism was always just a Western thing, completely, essentially, and it kind of sort of uproots it from capitalism, whereas it's with capitalism. And I would like to see something like, okay, there's certainly a lot of ordering in Western society, especially when you go to feudal society. A lot of ordering, and that goes to maybe it's not fully to the extent of race, and that's what I'm saying with capitalism, where you have now the wholesale trade in black bodies comes racism fully, and then you have to ask, in the feudal times now, where this gender, this biological determinism was also fully working, and women oppression was fully there.
Well, that's what she's challenging, though, in this book. That is what because at least I understand from like Walter Rodney's intervention that we were moving out of communal times to feudal times, and like these feudal formations were happening. And it's within these feudal formations that is the Oyo society that she's investigating, where she makes the argument that there was no, biological determinism was not the, the rationale for organizing the social world.
No, which I'm just saying that in European society, because obviously that is again the case. Like African society was not did not fit into the European I don't know how the social progression but it practiced, and it's only a society really that practices the kind of feudalism that was it was very extreme. It was also completely cut off from communalism. It was an extreme reliance on the use of other people to benefit some other people. And I'm not saying this is a thing, but I'm saying that if we were to investigate it deeply, we'd have to look into the material origins for this. And to me, just looking basic, like, in that kind of society, and also where it was extracting everything from the poor men and women, it was also now creating a new form of exploitation, oppression. That is, I say new, not new, but that women were put into role of work. It is work, it is oppressive work in the sense of a kind of division of labor, where you have to making women to do things that you say that men shouldn't do, whereas the men have to spend all their time doing some other things. And just like and just as happens with capitalism and with racism, with such a system, it's natural that then they now create a justification for it and say that is the way it's supposed to be. And it's all, what I'm saying, all these things in terms of feudal times, it's all written in the Bible, which is what influences a lot of the opinions of the Bible. In fact, it's a biological determinism is not giving a religious, justification, because once it's religious now, there's no questioning even further than just a natural understanding of society. And certainly, I'm not saying that that is the answer. I'm just saying when I think about it, and there's certainly no time to just go really into it. That's,
Are you saying that?
Yeah, can I quickly ask this question?
Wait, I just want to like just supplement.
Okay.
Saying that is your question? Are you?
Hello, can I come in, please?
Wait, I'm gonna finish and then.
Oh, you meet me for you now.
Wait,
no, let Bumi speak, please. Then I'll.
Let everyone relax. So, are you saying that okay, so this is like what I'm trying to like understand, what I understood from what you said, and I feel okay. So the feudal, what she's asserting is that during this time, and she goes more in depth as we read the book. I feel like more questions will be answered. I'm just piecing together like in my brain information from where like trying to make a whole. So I feel like what she's asserting is that, and what you're trying to get at, I feel like, is people were still being exploited. But I feel like we understand that capitalism becomes capitalism through the Atlantic slave trade and like colonialism. Like, yes, people were trading. Yes, during feudal times, there was an economy, but we didn't have this global economy, this global late stage, capitalism as we have it today. Even as colonialism and slavery was happening, at least I feel like capitalism today wasn't the same way it was at the time. And yes, people were still feudal times because we're moving away from a type of communalism where there's not this level of or any level of exploitation. But yes, people were being exploited, but it wasn't on the basis of gender, is what I feel like she's asserting. It was on the basis of, like, at least in all society, a hierarchy of age. So I don't think that she's asserting that it was a society where no one was being exploited. But I think what she's getting at is to understand how imposing gender in a society is a particular kind of violence. And the difference between having a gender hierarchy and having a hierarchy of age is that it's relational, as she says in the preface, that it depends on who is around at any given moment, as opposed to gender, which is static. And so the exploitation, I mean, it's still exploitation. It's not, it's not any better, but if the exploitation, I'm just putting two and two together, is based on hierarchies of age in this old Oyo feudal society, then that means it's constantly shifting, and who's getting exploited today is not who's getting exploited tomorrow, as opposed to gender, where we know that these are the people who are always getting exploited. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think certainly I'm not referring to the Yoruba view, which is very different. I'm just trying to understand the European, biological determinism and the origin of it, why it became organizing principle. But yeah, I think suddenly as we go into the book, obviously I'm sure there'll be more.
Yeah.
Well, can I ask the question that I intended to ask earlier?
Are you going to jump? I don't jump Adebayo. Let Adebayo come in and then you come in.
Well, I was the one who first indicated now.
Yinka, I want to be.
No, I want to ask you about the question. I'm not making a contribution, just a question.
Anyway, let me leave it to Bumi to continue to moderate. I'm sorry, should have come.
Well, I guess Yinka can go in then.
Yeah, talking about the origin of biological determinism, gender roles and the way the European countries are, formed? Like, has it always been like that? Like, where Oyeronke was talking about, we have female ballets, and it has to do with well, how did she phrase it? I think she said something like heritage rulership. I can remember how she phrased it. Like, it's not based on gender. Like, it could be a man, it could be a woman who's going to continue the heritage rulership. Like, my question is, has it always been like that also in Europe, that everything is based on gender, like, or maybe it's some set of white people that came about this whole ideology? Like, has this always been like that in the European society?
If you're asking me, honestly, I don't know. And I can't say that I honestly care, to be honest. I don't care what those people do with their lives. Like, they can do whatever they want. Just leave us out of it. But yeah, I honestly don't know. But it's a compelling question. It's worth like investigating for people who are interested in want to know.
Okay.
Hello, can I come in?
Yes, please.
I wanted to say what you said earlier about what you said earlier about the African society, and I just wanted to identify that, like, out of the context of this book, I'm trying to quote what what's it called? Oak said, which are set, which are like the foundation is based in America. The reason so is that we need to understand that even during the slavery time, the African society does not align with what the Europeans, or let me say the so-called Americans, means of what family is. And the reason why capitalism is able to redesign the African American society in America is that the black man has been so deprived, and he feels like the only way to be able to bring out his manhood is only in his own family. He's been so deprived of his own humanity, and he feels like the only way he can feel validated is to imitate the white man in his own home. So when the black man goes to his factory and is being deprived, the only thing he could do is to come back and feel the trait of the white man, like acting like a white man in his own family. Trying to create this patriarchy feeling. Like I'm the dominant and things like that, because he has been so deprived and been so segregated in the white society. So I feel like the understanding of gender in a black American society today is based on Western stereotype, because you need to understand that even as late as the 19th century upward to the early 20th century, they were still gay in Harlem. In most, let's say in the mostly North America, they were not being discriminated about how they feel about their bodies. So we also need to understand the influence of how capitalism has able to modify African society to the extent that they started having phobia, on men that decide to act like women supposedly, because why? They are being deprived of their manhood, of how they feel, because they wanted to be in the same shoes of the white man, because the white man is the one who was able to structure how the society has to be in America. So that's my own contribution. Hello?
Yeah. Okay. I want to, quickly add this. Sorry. There was a time, I'm trying to understand all of this, biological determinism concept and its origins, even though, Bumi doesn't care about what these people do, I care because it's kind of, helps to, create some kind of an objective criticism of the whole idea behind the concept. Take for instance in feudal Europe, where, even the Bible is, like, for example, the Pope, is a important figure in that political structure. We still have people, the whole feudal structure is expressive towards women, and we have some women who actually stood against that this is not the norm. Like, judging from a little bit of reading I and research that I've come across on European society, how it was formed before. So can we say this whole biological determinism, white supremacy, was a kind of well thought ideas by some group of, white men, and not like, not to generalize, that I'm trying to, protect or, make a case for the white population in general, but, just to be objective, in our criticism.
Are you saying,
How, huh?
are you saying that would mean that, because I don't put any legitimacy in the idea of biological determinism, like, because what they're trying to say is that, it's inherent, like gender is innate in human, like, nature, like gender binaries are innate, like this is kind of like we come out of the womb with a gender, like that's what they're trying to say, like that's their point, and that's just not true, because gender is a social construct. And when people who argue and say, oh, gender existed in Yoruba society, they still agree that gender is a social construct. But what these people who are using, biological determinism is, they're saying that gender is not a social construct. Gender exists out the womb. Like, it's part of biology, which is not true, because we can observe how gender is constructed. Anyway, that's why I don't think that there's any like logic to it. It makes this, I believe it's like pure nonsense, because it's just not true. Like, gender isn't biological. Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just saying that do all of the why, like, don't let us delve into that. Let's just stay on. So I'll just, save that question for another day.
Sorry, what was it? No, please finish your question. You were saying, do all of the whites?
Like, do all of the white, like the white society, has it always been, this concept, has it been with the, the white, as in from the beginning of the white, social formation, as it, this whole concept, has it always informed the understanding of, humans, like, like, has always been like this, or it's a new concept that was, populated by some set of people, in the white society. That's what I'm trying to understand, not to like disagree that what the book is saying about gender is not true. I'm just like, this concept, like, has it always been like this? Because, these people are very devious, they kind of distort all kind of, prehistorical claims about gender, and they come with their own conclusions and try to, make it as the, the general, concept that has been with, the people right from time. So I'm just trying to understand that, not that I'm trying to distort the fact that, that Oyeronke claims are not true, so.
No, yeah, it's definitely a valid question. That's just how I personally feel about it. I'm not saying that everybody has to have the same opinions that I have about the question you're asking. I would never say that. People are, you're free, like, everyone is free to investigate that. Like, obviously that's like very compelling. Like, it would be great to know how they, I think that the church has some hand in making, enforcing this hegemony of ideas.
Yeah.
But that, I personally don't really waste any of my labor investigating how they do whatever it is that they're doing. But definitely, and even further with the book, I have like points of arguments with her about in things that she says as well. Like, I'm not saying, which is why I said I'm not here to like profess anything. I'm not an authority on anything. So and anyone is like free to disagree with everything she says, or or 10%. Like, we don't have to have the same ideas about gender. We don't have to have the same we don't have to come to the same conclusions that she comes to. Even we can I know we live in a fascist state, but we don't we don't have to. I'm not enforcing. I'm not essentially. Anyone else?
If I may come in just very quickly, I don't want us to go to move on, but like I said earlier, and first of all, as we were saying, the ideas being challenged, are the ideas of gender, biologically determinism being universal, and it's a question of it being universal across space and also across time. It's not just are they universal. They're not universal. There's enough evidence to suggest they're not universal outside of the white world, if you want to put it that way. But there's also plenty of evidence that's not universal in the white world, and which is what I made reference to Engels's the origin of the family, private property, and the state. In terms of the kinds of the way family, even the way the family came about. So the modern family and what preceded it, but we certainly here challenging the idea that it can be universal, and like I said, and that is why I said it's always important to have a materialist understanding of in the way in which the way society is organized around whether work or exploitation, how it can have an effect in the way that things reality is constructed. But I certainly don't want to, there's, like I said earlier, we could also delve into this more over time. Anyway.
Yes, definitely. Okay, this has been an interesting slide. Moving on. That realization made it necessary to undertake a re-examination of the concepts underpinning discourse in African studies, consciously taking into account African experiences. How do we consciously take the experiences of African gender marginalized people into account in our discussions of African liberation? I just believe that we need to just center voices of, people who are non-men in our society, center them in discussions about solutions to ideas, take their experiences into consideration, not, gaslighting people or saying, no, this isn't your experience. Let me, you encounter like certain Nigerian African men on the internet, they're like, no, this isn't feminism. Let me tell you what feminism is really about, and that's just so funny. But yes, how do we take the experiences of, people who are gender marginalized in our communities into account when we're discussing African liberation?
Yeah, I think they are very important intersections that we should try to be conscious of. Like Baba said in the earlier contribution that he made about having a materialist understanding of things. Because when we have a materialist understanding of things, we see the points where oppression starts to raise head. And then we also must have that historical understanding. Then that is what fine-tunes our actions. And that is what makes us know that okay, women or gender as we know it, has been skewed in a white supremacist cloak, or has been grabbed in white supremacy. And then of course we now have to have this materialist tuning to balance it out, or make it encapsulating in such a way that the struggles of people that have been put up for super exploitation now is put on the center front. And then of course we now struggle to ensure that we dismantle the systems, be it feudal or even the ones that has now been internalized as Africans. We dismantle that, and of course, we dismantle imperialism. We dismantle the thing that is giving it life, that is stabilizing it, which means, looking inwards to ourselves. And then when I say to ourselves, it means indigenous or local structures, or traditional in quote structures that have now grown to stabilizing or engendering this, oppressive structures or oppressive acts or oppressive modes of thought and all that, So this understanding will help us kind of synthesize something out, or a pathway out into which we can with which we can solve this problem, because it's I don't claim to kind of know like this is it, but then like I think it would be along that line, so yeah. Okay.
Great. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Go ahead. Yeah, go.
Well, the way I understand this question, like, talking about marginalized African, let me read that again. Like, we're talking about, like, oppressed group, like gay people, for example, right? Like, how do we, take into account in our discussion of African liberation? Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. It's people who are marginalized not only by sexuality, also by gender.
Yeah, first thing I think we should do is, like for any liberation movement, like we should first of all expose the system for what it is, being misogynistic, patriarchal, and how it's informs knowledge, and how people see people who act outside of those confines, and not taking into account the African experiences. This was something that was prevalent in our culture pre-colonial eras and all of that. I think we should just I think it's something we should identify with, by exposing the structure that that informs extreme views or extreme reactions towards this people. So yeah, I think we should take that into account, in our discussion, for that exposing, the system for what it is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think, well, since what we are after is decolonization, I think, and it certainly cannot happen without decolonizing the effect of colonialism on our cultures, on our ways of thinking, and also the idea that it has brought into this into our society a way of dehumanizing people and oppressing people. So there's no way the African liberation is going to be complete without taking this in totality, really. We spoke earlier about the question of women's oppression, as being part of whether it should be, important in terms of if we are trying to avoid gender, in challenging gender, the idea of gender. But I think and it's going to be a continuous challenge, as we saw during the NSAS protests, where people who were fighting against oppression, they said they were fighting against oppression, of course, but when queer people attended the protest, they treated them very badly. They excluded them. They, and You know, and that will constantly happen, but so it has to become a necessity that, you know, that struggle itself becomes, this struggle for African liberation becomes process of raising consciousness of people about the, you know, the reasons for the fact that they have been colonized in many aspects, remain colonized, and challenging that colonization, without which they cannot really achieve liberation. So it has, certainly, first of all, it has to consciously be taken into account. You know, as you say, how do we consciously take the experience? So, first of all, we have to be conscious of it. You know, a lot of people are not. You know, and even people fighting for African liberation have been indoctrinated in so many diverse ways, whether it's through the religious viewpoint or whatever else. So, but the struggle itself is a way of enabling that to be challenged, rather than something. It's not, you know, something you know, to talk to people about. It's not as easy as, in the sense in which they are fighting against oppression, that they can become more open, certainly, to challenging these indoctrinations that they have.
Definitely, I agree. I think making it conscious is where the challenge really lies. People we're just collectively, we're just way too comfortable in our different, you know, be it class position or gender position or, you know, race position, whatever it is. We're just way too comfortable exploiting. So it's not funny. I don't know why I'm laughing. It's just, they're just way too comfortable exploiting, you know, people, you know, just saying, and this is why I feel like, you know, the biological determinism is so, you know, so dangerous, because people say, you know, God said, you're a woman, so God says you have to do this, that, like, for me. You have to do this, and that, you know, for me. I don't have to do this because according to God, or even worse, it's biology. It's, you know, it's innate. It's, you know, it's who we are, and not, you know, even attempting to question where how is biology formed? You know, what is the knowledge basis of this so-called biology? But yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. You know that biological determinism is so dangerous. I could recall when, you know, I was still a, you know, young lad in school. You know, aside from the fact that they teach you about biology, you know, from as a separate subject, you know what they do? They transfer the rest of, you know, like to like, you know, concretize that, you know, facts that, I mean, that fact with, you know, religious studies where they teach you about the family structure and the roles of each gender. You know, they tell you about the man.
Hello? I, I think we lost you there for a second.
And the woman and the children.
Hello?
Hello? Yeah, sorry, a call came in. You know, now I'm just trying to, you know, like buttress your points that, you know, it's so dangerous because even in our studies, it's more like an indoctrination. You know, right from the young age, you know, we are being taught all of these things, and you know, we're just, talking about how to actually, eradicating this. We have to bring into, into the, you know, debate that the institutions that's helped to, you know, further, you know, preach or, you know, teach these concepts, you know, like religion, for example, and also, you know, these westernized academies, you know, that we have here as well, you know, how it helps to, push this concept to African people, you know. So we have to, you know, include that in our overall teaching of the concept too. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide. The Yoruba case provides one such different scenario, and more than that, it shows that the human body need not be constituted as gendered or be seen as evidence for social classification at all times. In pre-colonial Yoruba society, body type was not the basis of social hierarchy. Male and females were not ranked according to anatomic distinction. What restrictions / limitations do you think are placed on the social world by having the body be used as a basis for social hierarchy? What or whose purpose does this hierarchy serve? I think I feel like we've talked about this already, but I feel like the restrictions, are placed on the people who are at the bottom of this hierarchy. They suffer materially because their labor is exploited, and but yeah, anyone else wants to chime in?
I think even in participation, in terms of maybe politics or how society is shaped, or making decisions as to, well, it still boils down to expectation of making decisions as to how the surplus of society is appropriated and all that. Women have been excluded from this process for, hundreds of years, so I think that's that. The function that it serves, that hierarchy serves, is to, stabilize and keep the social order going, like to make it seem as if, yes, this is what it is, and then it's natural. Women should not participate in this. It's just for so discussion. Women should be somewhere else under the tree, and then men should be inside discussing about what will go on in society. And we still have it in our political system in Nigeria here. These are bourgeois states, neo-colonial states, where we're still clamoring for women equality, that kind of thing. Like this is a relic of this system that puts women at the back of everything. So yeah, I think they've been excluded largely in determining how society should be shaped, which further cements the just order, and it goes around in a cycle like that.
Anyone else?
Yes, certainly and then when we are speaking about also the creation of women, or of people being born with certain anatomies, being determined to be naturally inferior or put in certain roles and restricted into their as human beings, to not be able to fulfill themselves in a sense, and that is not good for the society itself. You can say the society itself, apart from the class or the class of people who benefit from this hierarchy, and say it's, as you said earlier, it's a sick society that has and this is certainly a symptom of that kind of illness, where you have because I don't think we as men don't, and we are men because again we're born with an anatomy, and we are we don't necessarily have to be that, it's we're born with an anatomy. Imagine a different world in which that wasn't the case, and whatever your anatomy, you could explore yourself. Even for men, those created as men, it becomes oppressive for many, in the sense that they might not, that is not the way they feel they are being to be. But just besides that, now if you were now classified or categorized as woman, like I said earlier, a lot of for us men, it's invisible. It's become visible what they feel, but you can try and imagine and step in and think what Karl Marx uses this term alienation with reference to labor, to the laborer. But I certainly see this alienation working in this gender in a gender constructed world, and which an alienation in this sense means a sickness. It's like you are alienated or divorced from your nature, from your reality or your being, and you can imagine if you are not able to do the things you want to do, you have to suppress or hide them, in your mind, and then your mind will constantly be disturbed. It's certainly it's not easy to repress. And for example, somebody wanting, I don't know, you put it like you want a fruit, but they tell you no because you are born of one particular sex, and then but you really do want it, and you keep it to yourself, but the wanting is still there. You can imagine how disturbed you would be, and anyway, it's certainly something. If we can now imagine people who are made to be the women in our society, what actually they have to go through, then I think. And just lastly, as Sankara said, what happens when half of the sky, those who hold off half of the sky are are excluded? What does that mean for the society? It's not. It doesn't allow it to become what it could be.
Yeah, I just wanted to you said something, and I thought it was I just want to illuminate what you said. You said, this is as natural, and that's the point that she's trying to make, that nothing is natural, and which is why biological determinism is so dangerous, because people come to these conclusions as that being a woman is a natural thing, or being a man is a natural thing. It's not. It's socially constructed. We make it up, essentially. It's made up like money. We made money up. Like, this is all made up. We can make something else. It doesn't have to be like this. It's not natural. And I feel like men who really are interested in gender liberation, you don't really have to look that far out. You can interrogate the ways in which the construction of the male gender is detrimental to society as well, or detrimental on an individual level, is detrimental to the individual. I think when we get into the avenue of certainly empathizing, but when we get into the avenue of, we have to, that also is necessary to a point, but I feel like it's essential for people who hold the power currently in our society to interrogate how the system serves them on an individual level and on a structural level, and how it also restricts or limits their own what's the word I'm looking for, their potential at an individual and a structural level. I think doing both of those things, placing themselves in the situation of people who are oppressed, but also investigating and interrogating their own oppression, because of, it's weird, like, how can I be oppressed if I have power? But I think this is like Freire's prioritization, where he says that the oppressor is also oppressed in a situation, and I'm borrowing it to use for gender, but I think that men who are interested in gender liberation will benefit greatly from interrogating their own gender construction, and how detrimental the formation of man is to society as a whole. But yeah. Anything else before I move to the next slide? This was certainly an interesting slide. No? Okay, I'm gonna move to the next slide. A related issue is that scholars have assumed that present-day customs they encounter are always rooted in ancient traditions. I suggest that what word is this? What? This is blocking this. Timelessness? Let's just go with timelessness. I can't remember what I put there. I suggest that their timelessness should not be taken for granted. Some of them are new traditions, in quotation marks. What problems may we encounter today when we assume present-day customs are always rooted in ancient traditions? And I feel like this is what you were getting at in the beginning when you were talking about this. So, anyone wants to take it away?
Yeah, Sunday is it's a it's a serious problem, especially when now the claim is false. So if it was genuine, it's still an issue that you say, well, because things were the way they were that way, then that's the way it should be now. But in this case, there's deliberate distortion of what ancient traditions are, and like I said earlier, there's a distinction between what was indigenous and what is traditional. We have many discussions about whether people were gay in African state, for example, and you get about excluding the issue of gender, you have that, and people be very stubborn to claim that no, it's not possible, and this and that. But we ignore the evidence that plenty of evidence that the colonialists came with all these laws and anti-gay laws and so on. So and yeah, so it's used, if you say with problems, it's used to justify. It's always used because when you say something is ancient, like you said, it's always used to justify this is the way things are, this is the way they must be. But in this case, it's even a lie. If we actually say the way things are, then that this is a distorted history, a negated history, that African people in particular have to face. So, yeah, there are many plenty problems that we encounter with this. Yeah.
It's people try to be like, since time immemorial, there haven't been any gay people. We're like, that's not true. But yeah, it's certainly problematic, especially because we're not really taught any history. So all we have is like the colonial education, and we just, we're really at a disadvantage there. Yeah, anyone else wants to talk on this before we move on? No? Okay, wonderful. Next slide. I believe this is our last slide, so we're at the end. The idea that in dealing with gender constructs, one necessarily contributes to their creation is apparent in Judith Lorber's claim that the prime paradox of gender is that in order to dismantle the institution, you must first make it very visible. How do we make gender very visible in our society today? I don't know.
I think we have
Sorry? I can't hear. Is someone saying something?
I think we have to expose the institutionalized oppression that these gender roles, play or perpetuate in our society. Like, if we don't expose the plight of maybe, let's say, women or even lower class women in our society, because even the side of the women or men camp, you can see that, the so-called domestic women or domestic workers have it worse when it comes to this oppression now. So it's very, very important to make these things visible. That stratification must be brought to light, and then pointing out how it affects, the women folk in society. It's very, very important, to see how our social order and even the political economic system kind of hammers it down. The society must be exposed. That exposure is very, very important, and making people understand how these things permeate our society, be it at work, through religion, family arrangements, finances, or what we call economics. Like all these things we must show that in the whole of our superstructure, in media, everything must be shown so that we can now start thinking of ways to correct the problem. Yeah.
I agree. Anyone else? How do we make gender very visible in our society today? I think just pointing out to men the ways in which they maneuver the world and the ways, the particular power that they wield in, interpersonal relationships, or in, when we're dealing with these institutions, the way that even though, we're Africans, or, if you live in a society that's not, the same race, in like the settler kind of society, even though you're, marginalized by your race and your gender, or just your gender, you still wield, African men still wield considerable power in our society. And I believe, we just, it is, this burden really is on the men. It's not on the gender marginalized people to go out of their way to start doing this, because I believe in the process of, if they, they obviously they have the prerogative to do that, but in the process of doing that, they might encounter even more violence. So I think there's there's a lot of work to be done, and kind of shielding gender marginalized people from violence, and making space for them, making gender very visible in our society. So yeah. Anyone else? This is our last slide.
Yeah, like I've said a few times, for us men, and we have to really be aware of this. That's the funny thing about gender oppression and the construction of gender. Something has been constructed, but it becomes like invisible. How does it become invisible? So it's like, not only is it something that seems to be timeless, and but it's also so pervasive that it's like it's not there. So people are put into roles, and they're oppressed through those roles, and they're and the people who benefit from that in many respects, or who are not as affected by that, and don't even see it. You don't see the oppression. You don't see, it's very simply, apart from even whether gender constructs, just the oppression of women in general. You don't see it. You don't imagine it to exist. It's quite different from even when we are talking about even class oppression, in a way where you can say, well, this is more visible. This is a very kind of invisible kind of thing. So you do have to bring it out. And the how is not so very easy. Like now, as you say, and I think, again, we might not even understand when as you were saying, talking about the violence that people who are gender marginalized face, for example. For us, again, it might even be invisible to us. We don't. So it might be something that maybe we can talk about, because because people seem to see violence as something that somebody hits somebody with a stick, or so is that can you go into that a little bit?
So yeah, I mean, as you're saying, gender violence is expansive, right? Our definition of violence is expansive. This is like what I learned from Fanon, that, you know, words can be really violent. And not only words, but the lack of words, like, you know, the complete erasure of gender non-binary people, like someone was asking, you know, I've never heard of they, them before, because even in casual conversation and things that don't really particularly have to do with gender, you know, gender constructs, people don't even take gender queer or gender non-binary people into account. It's like they don't exist. So obviously when you get confronted by a gender, you know, non-binary person, you're like, whoa, where did you come from? And that's very violent, because what you're doing there is questioning my humanity. You're questioning, like, you're like, are you a real person? Like, you know, like,
Yeah.
like, you do that? Like, that's extremely violent. Like, you don't have the authority to interrogate someone about, you know, how they move through the world. And that's very violent. And when it comes to when it comes to emotional, you know, labor, that, you know, women are, you know, quote unquote, women are assumed to be the more emotional gender, assumed to be the more, you know, women are socialized into this role of caregiver, regardless of how they feel about caregiving. And that's this, to me, like, there's something particularly violent about that. Just because I present as a woman, as, you know, people are surprised, and I'm like, I don't want to hold your baby. I don't want keep your baby away from me. Like, there things are assumed, you know, that yes, you should want to be this caregiver role. You should want to assume this caregiver role. Why don't you want to take care of people? Well, I don't want to. like, and that's like a particular kind of violence that, you know, just goes unchecked, the erasure of people's identity, or just, you know, emotional violence that women, you know, have to, especially in Nigerian society, women have to, you know, go through every day. The well, there's nothing wrong with sex work, but the way, you know, women who are perceived to be sexually promiscuous are treated in our society like they're lepers or something. You know, like, women don't have the right to be, you know, to be sexually promiscuous in our society. That's something that's solely reserved for men. And so women, you know, go through their lives being sexually repressed because society, the moment that you go outside what society, you know, deems as normal, you're labeled, you know, a certain way, you're perceived a certain way. And then that perception means that you're no longer a person that we can treat with dignity and respect, right? Now we can treat you anyway, anyhow. And to me, like, that's just something particularly violent about that. So, I mean, I could go on all day, but like, those are just the things that come to mind now. I'm sure if we all like really think about it, we see the ways, you know, which we wield the powers that we hold, or how you know, as a man, wield that power, enacting violence on, you know, gender marginalized people just on a day-to-day basis. But yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, if I think of it not with gender, but just generally in terms of class oppression now. For example, you if you were excluded from certain things, and you can imagine there's a whole state apparatus that is geared to that, but it doesn't necessarily come into play every time. So it is there, and it stops you from being through so many levers. Not, you know, saying that you can see violence not necessarily as the expression of, you know, something bloody or hitting, but in the way it excludes, it marginalizes, it hurts, and it's, you know, and we spoke earlier about repression that people have to be under, you know, and in terms of control, you know, it's all part of it. And it's just the same way, like, you know, a man, you know, violent men, for example, many respects would not even need to to hit, or just the implied threat is there as well. and the control is there, the fear that you impart, we can even take fear, for example. I think that's better, you have hit somebody a few times, or the women have seen men hit, and and you imply the threat of it every day, and that person is fearful and lives under the fear, then there's no other way I can see that but being a violent situation, that imparting fear. And a lot of this is about fear. We even speak of people who actually dare to come out, as we, in terms of people who are gay, we speak of people coming out. So we say, you even dare to come out openly. And
that's like, I feel like there's a particular kind of violence in and of itself, like having, forcing people to, I don't owe you anyone anything, like forcing people to kind of acknowledge or make, the world acknowledge them for how they present. Like, I feel like even the whole, thing about coming out is particularly violent. Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, exactly. And people may come out under the real threats to their lives and many other things that will happen to them. But there's a lot of people who will never do so because of the fear of what will be, and and in many cases, many people are repressed as a result of that, and in itself, it's it's an act of tremendous force on them, external force. And I'm speaking of gay, but you can speak of people who are not, who are forced into gender constructs in any regard, which anything that society says this is the way it must be, and society has both. What's the word you use? Not I've missed the word, but something like formal and there are physical and non-physical ways of controlling society, and we have that, and so you are kept in your place in a sense, and anytime you try to dig out of it, and those of you who try to dig out of it are met with a lot of hostility, which is meant to scare you. So certainly I think it's something that we should discuss as we go into it. Yeah.
The end of our program. Takeaways. What did we learn, I guess? What did we unlearn? What did we this is takeaways and feedback. Boomy, you were terrible. This sucked. Boomy, the questions made no sense. Boomy, come up with better questions. Boomy, you were too slow. Boomy, you were too fast. Boomy, I didn't come away with anything. Boomy, you talk too much. Anyone is understandable. So yeah, just our takeaways, last thoughts, feedback. Yeah.
I think the episode was very interactive, not one-sided. And I think the more we interact with the book, the more we are able to dig into it and understand, even better all these things that might seem as if they're not, of great importance in our societies. But the more we interact with the book, the more we are exposed and sensitized to the things that we need to be even more conscious of in terms of gender relations and power dynamics in our society. So it wasn't about just that at all, and it can only get better, Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else?
I like the way it's been done, and very good. And again, as well, you just said, interactive. For us to delve into the book well and think about it. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it has been educative, and there's so much to learn and so much to unpack. So I think it's been a great discussion so far. So I look forward to more. Yeah.
And I think we're missing 2 people, or is that it? I think everyone spoke. Is that okay? Yeah. So thank you. Thank you.